Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really remarkable story from history. We're looking at how Ying Zheng went from this, well, basically a puppet king, to becoming Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor who unified China. And this isn't just, a story from way back when. Our sources paint it as a real masterclass in strategy and political maneuvering and just ruthless efficiency. It's about how someone, starting with almost no actual power, managed to not just grab it, but completely remake a nation.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to dig into those key moments, those critical choices, and the principles behind how Ying Zheng consolidated that absolute power. How did he unify a land that had been torn apart by war for centuries? We're going to look closely at the power players, the scandals, frankly, and the systemic changes that forged an empire.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Ying Zheng becomes king at just 13. Our sources call him a king in a golden cage. What did that actually mean day to day? Who was really pulling the strings?
It meant he had the title, but none of the real authority. That was all in the hands of his regent, Lu Buwei. And Lu Buwei's story is fascinating in itself. He wasn't old aristocracy or anything like that. He was actually a very wealthy merchant from Wei, super shrewd. And he approached politics almost like an investment. He backed Ying Zheng's father, Ying Yiren, who was kind of a minor prince held hostage at the time. Lu Buwei poured money and strategy into getting him onto the Ying throne.
An investment. That's an interesting way to put it.
It really was. And when King Xuanxian, yes, Yiren, took the throne, Lu Buwei got his return, big time. He became chancellor, the Xiangguo, and regent for the young Yingzheng. So effectively, he was the ruler of Qin. And his power wasn't just his official position. He had immense personal wealth. He'd appointed loads of officials who owed him loyalty, and he sponsored like 3,000 scholars, a huge network.
Wow, 3,000 scholars. And that ties into his big soft power project, doesn't it? The Lushi Chunki Encyclopedia. This huge book, finished around 239 BC. And there's an amazing story about him hanging it up at the city gates in Xianyang, offering gold if anyone could change a single character. What was that all about?
Right, that famous anecdote. Look, it wasn't just about creating an encyclopedia that was a massive intellectual achievement. It was a power move. It was Lu Buwei trying to position himself as the ultimate authority on, well, everything, philosophy, governance, morality, legitimizing his own power, which came from wealth and influence, not birth. It perfectly shows his investor mindset. Power is a transaction. But here's the crucial point. That view fundamentally clashed with Ying Zheng's idea of kingship. Ying Zheng believed in absolute power, divinely given. So this setup, it was bound to lead to conflict eventually, once the king started thinking for himself.
Which brings us back to Ying Zheng, king in name only, living in this golden cage. And adding to all that political vulnerability, there were these rumors swirling around, really personal ones, about his parentage.
Oh yes, that was dynamite. The persistent rumor was that Ying Zheng wasn't the previous king's son at all, that he was actually Lu Buwei's illegitimate child with the queen dowager, Zhao Ji. She had been Lu Buwei's concubine before he gave her to the prince. Now, whether it was true or not, and sources lean towards it being later propaganda from the Han dynasty to discredit Qin, the political damage was immense. It struck right at the heart of his legitimacy, his right to even be on the throne. And you can see how that kind of vulnerability right from the start would shape him. It made him deeply suspicious, hyper-aware of image, of controlling the narrative. Power wasn't just armies, it was information.
So he's learning these tough lessons very young. What was the big mistake then? The opening Lu Buwei gave him.
Right, the turning point. It came down to a massive scandal, a huge miscalculation by Lu Buwei that Ying Zheng exploited brilliantly, patiently, ruthlessly. It involved a man named Lao Ai. You see, as Ying Zheng got older, Lu Buwei started getting nervous about his own very close relationship with the queen dowager, Zhao Ji. It was dangerous. So to kind of distance himself, he came up with this plan. Find someone else to keep her occupied. He found Lao Ai, a man apparently famous for his sexual prowess,
Okay.
and smuggled him into the palace disguised as a eunuch. A massive risk. A tactical move with huge strategic downsides, introducing this, well, wild card.
A wild card indeed.
Yeah.
And Lao Ai didn't stay low profile, did he?
Not at all. He became the queen dowager's absolute favorite. They had two secret kids together. His influence just ballooned. He was made Chanshin, got incredible wealth, tons of followers, real political clout. He even started calling himself the king's foster father. The arrogance was astounding.
Foster father. Wow. And they actually tried to set up their own power base.
They did. They moved to Yangcheng, the old Qin capital, and essentially built a kind of state within a state. And our sources say they were actively plotting. The plan was to eventually depose Ying Zheng and put one of their secret sons on the throne.
But Ying Zheng knew. He was watching all this unfold.
He was playing a very careful, patient game. He definitely knew about the rumors, the growing power. He investigated Laowai secretly. But, and this is key, he didn't jump the gun, he waited. He waited for the absolutely perfect moment to strike. And that moment came in 238 BC. Ying Zheng turned 22. He was due to go to Yongcheng for his Guanli, the capping ceremony. This officially marked his coming of age, his right to rule fully.
Going to Yongcheng for the ceremony, right where Laowai had his power base. It seems deliberate. What was the calculation there?
It was absolutely calculated. He figured correctly that his absence from the main capital, Xianyang, combined with his formal coming of age, would be just too tempting for Laowai. He basically dangled the bait, and Laowai took it. Laowai forged the Queen Dowager's seal, raised troops, and attacked the palace back in Xianyang while Ying Zheng was away. But Ying Zheng was ready. He'd briefed his loyal generals. The orders went out instantly. The rebellion was crushed, fast, brutal, and the punishments, they were designed to send a message. Laowai was torn apart by chariots. His whole family, relatives included, to 3 generations, wiped out. Even the 2 young sons he had with the Queen Dowager killed. Zhaoji herself was placed under house arrest. This wasn't just revenge. It was, as you said, a political purification. It instantly established Ying Zheng's authority. No more puppet king. He was decisive, ruthless, and in charge.
Okay, so Laowai is gone, violently. That leaves the biggest piece on the board. Lu Bu. He was implicated, right? He brought Laowai in.
Directly implicated. But Ying Zheng didn't just have him executed immediately. That would have been too dangerous. Lu Bu still had too many connections, too much influence.
So another patient game.
Exactly. Strategic patience. First step. Strip him of his chancellor title. Allow him to retire to his lands in Luoyang. Out of sight, supposedly out of mind. But Lu Bu couldn't quite fade away. The sources say envoys and officials kept visiting him. He was still a potential rival, a rallying point for opposition. So about a year later, 235 BC, Ying Zheng sent him this absolutely chilling letter. It basically said, your accomplishments for Qin are minor compared to the rewards you've received. And then it ordered him into exile, to Shu, modern Sichuan, way out in the remote, harsh west.
Exile to Shu. So not execution, but a death sentence of sorts. What was the real meaning behind that order?
It was psychological warfare. It was humiliation. It was also, possibly, a final, twisted test of loyalty. Could Lu Bu accept this total disgrace? It was checkmate. Lu Bu understood, facing that kind of public ruin, knowing that execution was probably the next step anyway. He chose suicide, drank poison. His downfall wasn't about military strength. He didn't command armies. It was a failure to understand the new rules. He miscalculated the king's ruthlessness and the shift towards absolute personal loyalty to the throne.
And with Lu Bu and Laowai both gone, there's this huge power vacuum. Who fills it?
That void is filled almost immediately by Li Si, a brilliant, utterly ruthless official, and crucially, a hardcore believer in legalism, Fajia. Legalism, well, it's a philosophy that's all about strict laws, centralized power, and the absolute unquestionable authority of the ruler. It was the perfect ideology for Ying Zheng's ambitions. Li Si becomes the new chancellor, and he's the driving force behind the massive reforms that shaped the empire.
And these reforms were fundamental, weren't they? Tearing down the old ways.
Completely. Abolishing the old feudal system where lords ruled hereditary lands. Instead, a centralized bureaucracy. All officials appointed by the emperor reporting directly back to him. And the law became supreme, but it was the emperor's law. Whatever he decreed, that was it.
Which leads us to one of the most infamous policies, the burning of books and burying of scholars around 213 BC. That sounds pretty anti-intellectual.
It sounds that way, and it was certainly brutal, but its purpose wasn't really about hating knowledge itself. It was deeply political. Proposed by Li Si, naturally. The goal was to destroy historical records from the other states Qin had conquered, especially anything that glorified the old feudal system. And they targeted philosophical texts, particularly Confucian ones, that could be used to, as they put it, criticize the present by citing the past.
So controlling history to control the present, were there exceptions?
Yes, important ones. Practical books, medicine, farming, divination. Those were okay. And significantly, Qin's own historical records were preserved. But then came the burying of scholars. Over 460, the sources say, executed for defying the book-burning edict or continuing to promote forbidden ideas. It was ruthless, yes, but it was the final step in consolidating ideological control, stamping out any intellectual basis for opposition.
So political power consolidated, ideology unified. Next step, the military machine to conquer the rest of China. Now, you mentioned earlier systems playing a role here.
That's right. The bedrock of Qin's military power was actually laid down more than a century before by a reformer named Shang Yang. He established this revolutionary meritocracy system in the army, a 20-rank system based purely on battlefield performance. Famously, you gained rank by collecting enemy heads. Each rank brought real rewards: land, status, even legal perks.
And this wasn't just for nobles.
No, that was the genius of it. It was open to everyone. Commoners, even slaves, could rise through the ranks based on their battlefield success. Imagine the motivation that unleashed. It channeled the ambition of the entire population into serving the state's military goals. Created this incredibly fierce army, the nation of tigers and wolves, they called them. And critically, it broke down old loyalties. You didn't owe your status to a local lord anymore. You owed it to the kin state. That's powerful social engineering.
So you've got motivated soldiers, but what about the equipment, the logistics? Our sources talk a lot about standardization. That sounds less exciting, but maybe just as important, like standardizing chariot axles.
Oh, it was hugely important. Maybe less glamorous than battlefield heroics, but absolutely crucial for empire building. They set up state-run factories, churning out standardized weapons, bronze swords, powerful crossbows, consistent quality, easy to repair, easy to resupply armies in the field. They built a massive network of standardized roads. Think highways, allowing troops and supplies to move incredibly quickly. And yes, even standardizing the width of chariot axles sounds minor, but it meant every chariot could use every road smoothly. No bottlenecks. Logistics became incredibly efficient.
And this standardization went beyond the military.
Absolutely. Unified script, everyone writing the same way. Unified currency. Unified weights and measures. Think about it. Orders from the capital are crystal clear. Taxes are collected fairly and efficiently. Resources are measured and allocated precisely. It all creates this incredibly strong logistical backbone supporting the military campaigns.
And the generals leading these armies, they weren't acting like independent warlords.
No, that was stamped out. You had brilliant commanders like Wang Jian. He conquered Zhao, Yan, and Chu. Huge victories.
Yeah.
And the Meng family, Meng Ao, Meng Wu, and Meng Tian, extremely capable generals. But their power, their status came from the emperor, from serving the state, not from personal landholdings or inherited titles in the old way. Their loyalty was to the throne. Look at Meng Tian. He commanded 300,000 troops way up north, fighting the Xiong nomads, starting the Great Wall Project. That requires absolute trust and loyalty to the central command. And backing this up was the new government structure. The empire divided into 36 commanderies, later more, each run by a civilian governor and a military governor, both appointed by and reporting directly back to the emperor. No chance for regional power bases to build up like in the old feudal days. Power stayed centralized.
So looking back at this whole deep dive, it really is an incredible transformation. Ying Zheng, from that kid in the golden cage to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, clearly wasn't just luck or inheritance. It was a plan, a multi-layered, calculated, and a pretty ruthless strategy.
That really sums it up. The key elements were that strategic patience we saw, that political cunning, the absolute ruthlessness when dealing with threats like Laoai and Lu Buwei, and maybe most importantly, that systemic vision. Reforming everything administration, the military ideology, society itself from the ground up, all centered on the emperor. He literally used the constraints of his early life, that feeling of powerlessness, to forge the tools he needed to seize absolute power.
It's a profound story about power, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Thinking about Qin Shi Huang's methods, especially that use of systemic reform, controlling information, ideological unity, how much of that echoes through history in the rise of other powerful leaders, other states, maybe even things we see in the world today? What does it tell us about what power really is beyond just armies and walls?